The 1980s gave us mullets, synthesizers, and some of the worst cars ever made. But hidden beneath the mountains of Malaise-era garbage, beneath the plastic cladding and underpowered four cylinders, there were visionaries. Engineers and designers who saw the future and tried to build it, only to be ignored, mocked, or outright rejected by a market that wasn't ready. These weren't just advanced cars, they were time machines, cars with technology that wouldn't become mainstream for another 10, 20, even 30 years. All-wheel drive supercars, digital dashboards, turbocharged efficiency, active aerodynamics. They had it all, but they failed. Not because they were bad, but because they were too good, too early, too far ahead of what buyers could understand. And now, they're forgotten, dismissed as quirky 80s experiments that nobody cared about. But that's a lie. These cars deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be celebrated, because without them, the modern automotive world wouldn't exist. So before we rewind the clock, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because Garage History is about to uncover 10 forgotten cars from the 1980s that were absolutely, undeniably way ahead of their time. Stick with me, because the #1 spot is a car so revolutionary, so insanely forward-thinking that it terrified its own manufacturer. We're talking about a machine that had features you won't find on most modern cars, and it came out in 1987. The story behind why it failed? Absolutely heartbreaking. You do not want to miss this. Number 10. 1986 Ford Taurus SHO prototype era. Let's start with a car that changed everything, but nobody remembers it that way. The Ford Taurus. Yes, that Taurus, the boring family sedan your neighbor drove. But here's what you don't know. The Taurus was a revolution when it debuted in 1986. While every other American sedan looked like a brick with headlights, the Taurus had aerodynamic curves, a drag coefficient of 0.32, and a design language that looked like it came from Europe. Ford's engineers didn't just want a new car. They wanted to rewrite the rules, and they did. The Taurus introduced flush-mounted glass, ergonomic interiors, and a focus on fuel efficiency that was years ahead of Detroit's gas-guzzling mentality. But the real magic? It proved that American buyers would accept radical design if it was done right. The Taurus became the best-selling car in America and paved the way for the SHO performance variant in 1989, a Yamaha-built V6 screamer that proved sedans didn't have to be boring. But Ford's gamble almost failed. Dealers hated the design. Focus groups called it ugly, and yet it became iconic. The Taurus wasn't just ahead of its time, it defined the next decade of automotive design. But if you think aerodynamics were revolutionary, the next car took technology to a whole different level. Number 9. 1987 Buick Regal GNX. The GNX wasn't just fast, it was devastating, and it did it with a formula that wouldn't become mainstream until the 2000s. Turbocharged V6, all-black stealth styling, performance that embarrassed V8 supercars. In 1987, the Buick Regal GNX could hit 60-mile Paris in 4.6 seconds and run the quarter-mile in the low 13s. That's Ferrari territory, from a Buick. With a 3.8-liter turbocharged V6 making 276 horsepower, which everyone knew was underrated. Real-world dyno tests showed closer to 300. But here's what made it ahead of its time. Forced induction in a performance car was rare in the 80s. Most manufacturers were still clinging to big displacement V8s. Buick proved you could make serious power with a smaller, more efficient engine. And they did it in a package that looked like your grandma's grocery getter. Today, every performance car uses turbocharging. The GNX was the blueprint. Only 547 were built, and they sold out instantly. But GM killed the program, killed the turbocharged Buick V6 performance legacy, and buried the whole idea for over a decade. Why? Because it made the Corvette look slow, and GM couldn't have that. But while Buick was building turbocharged sleepers, the next car was doing something even more radical. It was changing the entire concept of what a sports car could be. Number 8. 1984 Pontiac Fiero. Everyone remembers the Fiero as the plastic GM sports car that caught on fire. But here's the truth. The Fiero was a masterpiece of engineering vision. It just got sabotaged by GM's penny pinching. This was America's first mass-produced mid-engine sports car. Mid-engine. In 1984, that's the layout used by Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and modern supercars. And Pontiac did it for under $10,000. The Fiero had a composite body on a steel space frame, which meant it was light, rust-proof, and safe. It had pop-up headlights, sharp wedge styling, and handling that shocked European sports car makers. But GM's executives neutered it. They forced Pontiac to use the Iron Duke 4-cylinder from the Citation, a gutless, wheezy engine that made 92 horsepower. They slashed the suspension budget. They delayed upgrades. Why? Because they didn't want the Fiero to outsell the Corvette. By the time Pontiac finally got approval for a proper V6 and updated suspension in 1988, it was too late. The Fiero's reputation was destroyed by early model fires caused by cheap engine components. GM killed it. But the vision? It was perfect. A lightweight, mid-engine, affordable sports car. That's exactly what the Toyota MR2, Mazda MX-5, and Lotus Elise became. Pontiac had the idea first. They just weren't allowed to execute it. And speaking of execution, the next car on this list executed its mission so well, it became a cult legend, but still got forgotten by history. Number 7. 1986 Merkur XR4 Ti. If you've never heard of the Merkur XR4 Ti, you're not alone. But if you care about turbocharged performance in European handling in an American showroom, you need to know this car. Ford wanted to bring European sophistication to the US market, so they created the Merkur brand and imported the Ford Sierra XR4i, rebadged as the XR4 Ti. This thing was wild. It had a 2.3-liter turbocharged four-cylinder, making 175 horsepower, which doesn't sound like much until you realize it was wrapped in a lightweight rear-wheel drive chassis with independent suspension and a 5-speed manual. This car handled. It had a biplane rear spoiler that looked like it came from a touring car racer. And it was fast, but American buyers didn't get it. They didn't want a small European Ford with a Turbo 4 when they could buy a Mustang GT with a V8. The Merkur brand died in 1989, and the XR4 Ti faded into obscurity. But here's the thing. This car predicted the entire hot hatch movement. Turbocharged 4 cylinders, rear-wheel drive, performance through handling, not just horsepower. That's the formula that made the BMW M2, the GR86, and the Supra. Ford had it in 1986. They just couldn't sell it. And while Ford was struggling with European imports, the next car was showing the world what Japanese engineering could really do. Number 6. 1989 Mazda MX-5 Miata NA. Wait, the Miata isn't forgotten. It's one of the best-selling sports cars ever made. True, but hear me out. In 1989, the idea of a small, lightweight, affordable roadster was dead. British sports cars were gone. The market wanted big, fast, expensive, and Mazda said no. They built the Miata with one goal: pure driving joy. No turbo, no all-wheel drive, no digital gadgets. Just a 1.6-liter four-cylinder rear-wheel drive, a manual transmission, and 2,100 pounds of perfection. And it worked. The Miata proved that you didn't need 400 horsepower to have fun. You needed balance, feedback, connection. That philosophy was radical in 1989, and it's still radical today. Because while every other sports car has gotten heavier, more complicated, and more expensive, the Miata stayed true to its roots. It's now in its 4th generation, and it's still the best-selling roadster in history. But in 1989, it was a gamble, a throwback, a car that shouldn't have worked. And yet it became the blueprint for driver-focused sports cars. Mazda saw the future, and the future was less, not more. But while Mazda was perfecting simplicity, the next car was doing the opposite. It was piling on technology that wouldn't be common for another 20 years. Number 5. 1987 Buick Reatta. The Buick Reatta is one of the most forgotten cars of the entire decade, but it was also one of the most advanced. This was Buick's attempt at a luxury 2-seat coupe, and it was packed with tech that was decades ahead. The Reatta had a touchscreen CRT display in the center console. In 1987, you could control climate, radio, and diagnostics by touching a screen. Tesla didn't invent that. Buick did. 40 years ago, the Reatta also had digital diagnostics, trip computers, and features that wouldn't become standard until the 2000s. But it flopped. Why? Because it was expensive, underpowered, and marketed to the wrong audience. Buick targeted older luxury buyers who didn't want touchscreens. They wanted leather, wood, and simplicity. The Reatta was too young for its buyer base and too old-fashioned for younger enthusiasts. GM killed it after just 4 model years. Only around 21,000 were built. Today they're dirt cheap and totally forgotten. But the technology? It was visionary. Buick saw the future of in-car interfaces and built it before anyone else. They just couldn't make people care. And while Buick was fumbling touchscreens, the next car was proving that American engineering could build a supercar, if only they were allowed to. Number 4. 1988 Pontiac Fiero GT with V6. Yes, the Fiero is back. But this time we're talking about the car it should have been from day one. By 1988, Pontiac had finally upgraded the Fiero. The GT model got a 2.8-liter V6 making 140 horsepower, a completely redesigned suspension with proper control arms and tuning, and updated styling that looked sharp. And suddenly, the Fiero was good. Car and Driver praised it. Road and Track praised it. Buyers loved it. This was the mid-engine American sports car that could finally compete with Japanese and European rivals. But GM killed it. In 1988, right when it got good. Why? Because the Corvette. Again. GM's executives were terrified that a cheap mid-engine Pontiac would steal sales from the flagship Chevy, so they axed it. The 1988 Fiero GT was the END, not the beginning, and it's heartbreaking, because this car proved that American engineers could build a world-class sports car on a budget. They just weren't allowed to keep building it. Today, the 1988 Fiero GT is a cult classic, and clean examples are starting to appreciate. But most people still think of it as the fire car, and that's a tragedy, because this was the template for every affordable mid-engine sports car that came after it. And speaking of templates, the next car created a formula that's still being copied today. Number 3, 1986 Audi Quattro Sport. The Audi Quattro didn't just change rallying, it changed the entire performance car landscape. And the 1986 Sport model, that was the peak. This was a short wheelbase, lightweight, all-wheel drive monster with a turbocharged inline-5 making over 300 horsepower. It had a body made from aluminum and Kevlar. It had flared fenders, a massive rear wing, and looks that screamed race car, because it was a race car. Audi built just 224 Quattro Sports to meet homologation rules, and every single one was a purpose-built weapon. But here's what made it ahead of its time. All-wheel drive in a performance car was unheard of in the 80s. Everyone thought, oh, ADWD was for SUVs and snow. Audi proved it was for speed. The Quattro dominated rally stages, and it forced every other manufacturer to adopt all-wheel drive. Today, nearly every supercar uses OWD. The Nissan GT-R, the Lamborghini Huracan, the Porsche 911 Turbo. They all owe their existence to the Audi Quattro. But in 1986, it was a radical experiment, and it worked. The Quattro Sport is now worth over $500,000, and it's one of the most collectible cars of the entire decade. But it's still forgotten by casual enthusiasts who don't know the history. And that's criminal, because without this car, modern performance would look completely different. And speaking of different, the next car took aerodynamics to a level that still hasn't been matched. Number 2, 1987 Porsche 959. The Porsche 959 wasn't just ahead of its time, it was from the future. This car had technology in 1987 that most cars don't have in 2025. Twin turbocharged flat 6, check. All-wheel drive with torque vectoring, check. Adjustable ride height, check. Tire pressure monitoring, check. Sequential twin turbos to eliminate lag, check. This car hit 19.7 mph and could go from 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds in 1987. That's faster than a modern 911 Carrera. And it did it with technology that wouldn't become mainstream for decades. The 959 had magnesium wheels, Kevlar body panels, and an advanced suspension system with electronic dampers. It was built to dominate Group B rally racing, and it did. But Group B was banned, and the 959 became a $400,000 supercar that was too advanced for its own good. Porsche only built 337 of them, and because of US import laws, they couldn't even be sold in America until the late 90s. Today, they're worth over $2 million, and they're still more advanced than half the cars on the road. The 959 was a statement, a declaration. It was Porsche saying, we can build anything, and they did. But even the 959 wasn't the most forward-thinking car of the 80s. Because the number 1 spot, it's a car that had features you won't find on most modern vehicles. And it came out in 1987. Number 1, 1987, Oldsmobile Aerotech. Here it is. The most forgotten, most advanced car of the 1980s. The Oldsmobile Aerotech. And if you've never heard of it, that's because GM buried it. This wasn't a production car. It was a concept, a prototype, a vision of what Oldsmobile could build if they were allowed to. And it was insane. The Aerotech had a mid-mounted turbocharged quad-4 engine, making over 900 horsepower in race trim. It had active aerodynamics, a carbon fiber chassis, and a drag coefficient of 0.1 lun, which is lower than a Formula One car. In 1987, the Aerotech set 30 speed records, including a closed course speed of 267 mph. That's faster than most modern supercars. From an Oldsmobile, but here's the tragedy. GM never built it. They never produced it. They used it as a marketing stunt, then shelved it. Why? Because Oldsmobile was dying. GM didn't want to invest in radical technology for a brand they were already planning to kill. The Aerotech proved that American engineers could build world-beating technology. They could compete with Ferrari, Porsche, and Lamborghini. But GM didn't want them to, so the Aerotech disappeared. It's now sitting in a museum, a relic of what could have been. And that's the ultimate tragedy. Because this car represented the future, and GM threw it away. And there you have it, 10 forgotten cars from the 1980s that were way ahead of their time. From turbocharged Buicks to mid-engine Pontiacs, from all-wheel drive rally legends to land speed record holders, these machines saw the future and tried to build it. Some succeeded, some failed, but all of them deserve to be remembered. If you love this trip back to the 80s, smash that like button and drop a comment. Which one of these do you think was the most revolutionary? And if you're craving more forgotten automotive history, more buried legends, and more stories that deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because Garage History has plenty more where this came from. We're digging up the lost, the rare, and the revolutionary, one video at a time. Thanks for watching, and remember, these cars weren't forgotten because they failed. They were forgotten because the world wasn't ready. Until next time, keep the passion alive and the history loud.